Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another university segment of our REIMAGINE 2020 virtual conference series. This is version 2.0, Disrupting the System. I'm your co-host, Ashlie Meredith, Head of Education at MouseBelt Blockchain Accelerator, and today I'm interviewing David Noble. He's the director of the Werth Institute at the University of Connecticut, and also the co-founder of a blockchain company called Gunclear that seeks to provide firearm owners a private and digital way to manage their inventory. Welcome to the show, David. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's more my honor than yours.
How are you doing today? Reporting from Connecticut?
From Connecticut, Stamford, Connecticut specifically, and it's been rather hot. So I think it's like 90 degrees out there. Trying to avoid that at all costs right now.
Well, since we haven't had you on before, last time we asked everybody, since we have so many students tuning in, we thought it would be really interesting for them to see how people who have been investing in the space for a while, who've been building it, actually got here. So what were you doing before blockchain, and what got you into it and what got you interested?
So we can go a long way back or a little way back. When I first learned about Bitcoin, I was in a PhD program at University of Alabama. A student told me about it and said we should buy some of this. And I was like, how, right? But didn't really start to understand it until attending a conference around actually data analytics. And it was it was out at MIT. Doesn't matter. One of the big ICOs of 2017. Some of those folks, and talking to them through like how you manage data. And they started like, oh, well, do you know about blockchain? And I was like, no. Then they told me, and I was like, well, I think I own one of those, right? Like, 2000. I guess that would have been 2015, 2016 timeframe. So, it just sort of, it was a necessary connection, I think, from, sort of big data into management, into digital transformation, and, my interest is innovation. So here was this thing that nobody knew about, right? You'd have to whisper and ask, like, do you know about Bitcoin? Like, so that's pretty clearly. I remember asking the question. It was maybe Anaheim. I remember hearing it and then going and Googling and then going back to New York and participating in a lot of different stuff that was happening in New York at that time.
So do you have a technical background? What were you getting your PhD in at the time?
No, so organizational psychology, sociology. The least fancy word of it is management, right? And I'm an entrepreneurship professor. A lot of business strategy too on that side. But my professional background before that was entrepreneurship law, and anything from startups to IPOs and a few things in between. And so it was just sort of circulating around it and became much more technologically aware 2011, 2012, that the actual world was changing. I think that was how we all sort of made that move, right? I mean, before Facebook, before Google, before Amazon, those things weren't really that interesting, I guess. The internet became more interesting. Business became more than selling something on a website. And as those companies started to grow, it just was a question I became obsessed with. And one of the answers was like, how do you start to reduce monopoly and data surveillance? And one of the answers possibly is blockchain. And so I just keep following that.
Absolutely. So it sounds like you're kind of naturally entrepreneurial and attracted to anything that's kind of new or innovative. I'm really interested in entrepreneurship education as well, kind of going hand in hand with blockchain because, as you know, MouseBelt is an accelerator. So we want to take startups to that next level. And it just involves a lot of basic education around entrepreneurship. So wanted to hear more about the Werth Institute at University of Connecticut and just all things blockchain at your university. You said that you started teaching back in 2016, and I think usually what I've seen, at least in the last 2.5 years, is that there's a lot of it's a lot of student demand and student driven interest in blockchain, but I love seeing campuses where there's faculty support and that faculty are driving those initiatives. So yeah, tell us about the Institute and everything having to do with blockchain at UConn.
So I was in the business school, right? And, we had in our computer science department, we had people doing early research with Cardano, and we've had people in finance talking about this. And I've always come at it from well, are you going to create businesses? Like, that's always the question. Bitcoin exists. Why do we need other things? That sort of maximalist approach to just crypto in general. I think you need to be able to do something, and you should have customers. It's a radical thought in some of our engineering places, right? And I really started teaching it in 2016 to learn, like independent studies, small classes. Like, I got to learn, and I want to learn. I'm reading. I'm interested. And how can I find a way to devote enough time to learn something new while also doing my job? And sometime in 2017, someone asked the dean, who at your school is worried about Bitcoin and blockchain? And he had the answer, David Noble. And that sort of helped my career a lot, to the point that we went out and pitched an idea of what a university institute could be like, right? What could something that is truly targeting every student on campus, that's inclusive, as inclusive of a computer science student or a biomedical student as the puppet pro students at UConn, right? Like, we have a world's elite puppet program. You don't see that very often.
I don't think I was sure exactly what you meant when you said that,
Yeah,
but you
no,
literally meant
yeah,
you could
puppets.
major in puppet.
Yeah, like the Muppets.
Yeah,
Any puppet in entertainment is somebody actually built that. Somebody actually manipulates it and brings it to life, right? And so UConn's one of the places where that happens, and almost all of those students become entrepreneurs. I think we look at that curiosity, the same curiosity that brings a lot of students to blockchain or Bitcoin, and regardless of what their background is. And that's what we're looking to enhance at our institute, and really push forward this idea that, like, you need to be thinking about the world entrepreneurially, even if you don't want to found something. And there's a lot of jobs for the second, third, fourth, fifth, eighth, 12th, Silicon Valley culture, where, you have to have a number as to which employee you are. That pathway is there for students as well. And so we want to think about it as larger than founding businesses. And it's a lot of fun. My job every day is a load of fun, and I have the freedom to go and get 4 law students and 4 MBAs and 4 computer science students and teach a 12-person class on smart contracts. That's a privilege, not a right. But since I get to do it, I feel empowered to do it. And every time you teach something or bring in co-teachers, like in that case, you learn a whole new level of what's going on in the technology.
Yeah, you touched on a couple things that I see come up in my conversation with educators and with some of the industry leaders that we've interviewed, Roger Ver, Mark Yusko, that these are people who are very interested in self-educating, who really communicate the importance of reading books. And they gave us book recommendations, and we gave some away to students and posted on Twitter what those guys, book recommendations are. I might ask you at the end of this if you have any book recommendations, but student groups where they're starting mentorship programs so that people in their club can get newbies up to speed. And just the best way to learn anything is to teach it, right?
I learned from students more than I've ever taught. It's straight and simple. People ask me, why do you run that program? And it's like, I have students around me all the time. I want to learn how venture capital really works. It's not worth me going and learning. Like, empower students to learn, empower students to get internships, empower students to get jobs. And guess what? They bring all that information right back to the community that we create. And so you can't replace reading books, but you also can't replace doing, right? And that's something we stress over and over and over again. Talking about stuff is great. Like, I'm an academic. I love to talk, right? I don't. Who cares who's listening? I'm talking.
Guilty.
Yeah, right. And so, but at the Werth Institute, fundamentally at the core of what we're trying to do is encourage doing, and intentional doing, and doing things worth doing. That's a pun, right? And I need to write that down for a t-shirt somewhere. But it really is about that. Like, get into problems that are big enough and exciting enough for you to work on them. Blockchain's a unique place in the entrepreneurial community. Some of the smartest people you'll meet, but also they go and do stuff, but they don't necessarily finish. And this has been a pushback on many, many teams. How do you separate someone really ambitious from someone that's just fraudulent, right? And so I really look for teams that have shown that they execute in Web 2.0. Like, like, can you execute? Who's running projects? These are questions that doing, coming from that background of doing. So you learn and you do, which one do you do? Which one happens first, doing and learning? I think they're parallel, right? Like, and that's what we have entrepreneurship classes in the School of Business. We have, programs in design. We have programs in computer science. But what we try to bring is that parallel path of creating stuff and getting it into people's hands at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to 2 points that we've kind of always tried to embody or talk about here at MouseBelt as a hands-on accelerator. One thing I heard you mention before is bringing that business mindset into the development. I think a lot of projects out there are building solutions that are looking for problems, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
100%.
Yeah, encouraging people to really go out there and listen to consumers. And if people are working on remittances projects because they want to like save Latin America, like, are you actually in Latin America, like talking to the people there about what use cases are actually going to work for them? Or are you just creating this ultimate solution that no one asked for yet?
Yeah, it's mostly what happened. If you think about blockchain in the history of the internet, in that context, it would not have received the investment it's received now if we didn't know what happened to Google and what happened to like it wouldn't have received that level of investment because it hasn't proven itself out on a day-to-day use case. So is it a little ahead of the skis? Probably. But it's a more educated market, right? I mean, pets. I used to get back in the 17 boom. There was like, oh well, it's just pets.com. It's just a bubble. It's
Yeah.
It's like, well, okay, now I think it's 2020. It's safe to say it's more than that, right? Yes, there was a bubble there, which was fueled by a mania, but it wasn't a bubble to zero, right? I mean, it just wasn't. There was overreactions both ways. They always use the pets.com example, and it's like, yeah, but Google was started that same year. Priceline, fastest company to $1 billion revenue, also a Stamford, Connecticut company. You know, those
Oh,
things were,
really?
yeah, started with the UConn CTO, right? Started back in
Nice.
the day. So got to give a plug. But, you know, I mean, like those things happen too, right? And I always said, like, some of these blockchain projects are never going to see the light of day, and that's right. Some of them are going to blow up and just blow up in your face, and some are going to just keep on keeping on, and then someday you're going to see where they found their product market fit. And you know, I think that that model looks correct today, 4 years later.
Yeah, no, I love everything you're saying because that's really what inspired us to start our own accelerator. We saw, kind of all of the funding that was going behind projects that were not advancing on their roadmap at all. In 2017, it seemed like there was a lack of blockchain engineers, and we were running a development shop. So kept getting asked to do payment integrations with blockchain. So we're like, huh, this is interesting. So we're building on projects on contracts, and then teamed up with an investment fund to invest in projects, not just with capital, but developer hours. Because we wanted to try this model of, can we take a startup and ensure that a percentage of its resources that's getting from us have to go to actually building something. So
You gotta get past research engineers too. You know, I mean, a research engineer is a research engineer. They're brilliant, they're exciting, and they lose interest really fast. And when they're not building the next thing, right? And a lot of times they push back on sort of the whip, but there's a reason why businesses exist and why sort of management and leadership matters. And some of it is like, hey, simple project management goes a long way. And I can't think of how many blockchain projects have missed deadlines, missed ships. We were in the Web3 Foundation's grant process. Polkadot was supposed to launch by the end of 2019, right? And it launched the other day. So, 8 months later, I mean, it's not bad compared to others, right? But, research is hard. That's when you're building something that's theoretically possible but not yet built, that's hard, and you're going to miss deadlines.
yeah, I think that as academics, we're much more aware of the amount of time it can take to really flesh out ideas. I mean, 10 years for a PhD. But then you have that mixed with the entrepreneur, like moving fast, growth, growth, growth. It's been interesting to try to bridge the gap between academia and industry and set different expectations for what you should be able to get out of a grant in 6 months time, or on the opposite side, where universities could maybe cut some of the red tape to get more funding and whatever.
You brought up a great point too with regard to blockchain entrepreneurship. The growth model doesn't work either, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the key tenets of Gunclear is you need to have a transaction number per second and over time that is sustainable on today's blockchain infrastructure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I want to get into your current blockchain project that you're building here in just a moment. I wanted to ask you just personal question about your philosophy of entrepreneurship, because you said, you're with your institute and having an interdisciplinary focus and being able to work with so many different students who may or may not start a business, you still want them to think entrepreneurially. And I was just wondering, what does that mean for you? Is it just like the curiosity you were talking about, or what else goes into having like an entrepreneurial mindset?
So the curiosity is one of the three core tenets, right? Like I think about it. And curiosity is sort of the precondition and the necessary but not sufficient, right? Plenty of curious people, you end up a bookworm, you end up sort of a cocktail party entrepreneur. It's not just the curiosity, but it's also the creativity, right? To create output. Like you gotta have something come out of it, I think. One of the things I've always felt weird about with DeFi and some of those remittances things is, well, what's the output? What's the thing that I couldn't get in the traditional system that you've just made possible? And I feel like there's a lot of unanswered questions in that area. Like, oh, I wrapped Bitcoin in this, and now you can use it on the. Okay, well, you're still not answering why at the end of the day. Like I don't understand why I would want to borrow in crypto versus fiat. That's for other people to decide. So creative output, curiosity, and then that element of doing. So you have the output. Doing something just to do it is not enough. It's like, why do you want that output done in the first place? And really thinking about that. And it's a triangle, so it's not really a circular way, but that I think it flows back and forth, and at different points at different times we engage with those three things, right? Like there's times to build and do, there's times to really test and understand and empathize with your market, and then there's times to be curious and say, well, what is that and why is it here, and what can I do with it? I don't even know. And I really do believe that we haven't figured out what blockchain and Bitcoin are really truly for. That's a fundamental belief that I have when looking at everything in the space. And I'm excited and hopeful that I'll be around when they figure that out, right?
Yeah, I think that involves a lot of thinking that goes beyond entrepreneurial or technical backgrounds, which is why I always am really encouraged to see people coming from all sorts of different backgrounds into blockchain, myself, philosophy, right? Thinking about what are the societal impacts of the technologies we're building. When you talk about things about whys and purpose, right? That's philosophy. I also was just thinking of, I don't know if you know that Gertrude Stein quote about it takes a lot of doing absolutely nothing to be a genius. Yeah. And how much of that just sitting and thinking is so important, and it doesn't feel like doing anything, but it takes a lot of doing absolutely nothing for genius to happen.
It goes back to the research engineer and the time frame, right? There's a certain genius there to have, whether it's engineering or chemical or bio, in the pure sciences, there's something special about making a breakthrough. I don't know what it is, but it requires lifetimes of thought and aha, and it's not linear. It's not, you're absolutely right. It's oftentimes it's stepped as opposed to linear, and it looks like nothing's happening and then it's done. And I think that's where, because you look at some of the blockchain breakthroughs that we have had, zero knowledge proofs, with Zcash, the ring signatures with Monero, Bitcoin in and of itself, Ethereum, staking, all these different things. Like, it's not surprising that ETH 2.0 is way behind, right? If you think about it, like now, it was always it was always a ridiculously ambitious goal. Ethereum's a 100-year project, in my opinion, right? I mean, Vitalik made contributions, Lad made contributions, Gavin, like all these people made a lot of contributions, but it hasn't had the breakthrough. I mean, show me the app on your phone that you really use that's blockchain based. It's not an exchange.
I love that you asked that, because it's a question I have asked people for fun sometimes and in interviews as well, which is, do you have a single blockchain app on your phone that isn't a wallet or exchange?
No, absolutely not.
Yep.
Does anyone send crypto at this point and not be extremely nervous with an address?
I feel pretty confident when I send money.
That's good.
Yeah.
You've done it more than a few times then. Because I mean, it's a and how much money are you sending?
Oh, I mean, just we
You
sponsor
know,
student events and
right.
like, do giveaways and stuff. So it's not huge amounts. But yeah, no, I guess if you're gonna send like $500,000 house
I'm thinking
purchase
like
on the
I'm thinking like
Bitcoin.
yeah, I'm thinking like a thousand Bitcoin, right? Like
Okay, yeah.
how many times would you recheck this and check it? Like what the transaction fees are fantastic. The sovereignty is fantastic. The user experience is sickening until you get word that it's arrived in that space. That's just wallets. And you think when I send over $5,000 or $10,000, I always send a couple pennies first, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
um, to a new wallet. If it's an old wallet, I try to keep it whitelisted. But like think about the app, like what do you really trust to work on blockchain right now? And that's just a shortcoming of what we've done. But when you think of layer one abstraction, like there's a lot of building, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
building. And so that's not that surprising if you start to put it in, when did the internet start and when did it end? And why do we think this thing that's more complicated than the internet is suddenly going to work because someone theoretically thought about it? And so I think there's still a lot left, and you're absolutely right. I think there are apps out there that people will start using. I think breakthroughs in oracles are a big deal. When you start to have a breakthrough in your knowledge oracles that you can rely on and write smart contracts that interengage with them, now we're going to see something, right? But like we can't even trust the New York Times in today's age because the idea that like, okay, so news is written from this perception and you know I, I don't
Yeah.
I don't know where the oracles come from that we can rely on that something actually happened. And that's going to be one of the true keys. Gambling. There are people with gambling apps on their phone, 100%.
Oh yeah, I think gaming is a big one. I have a messaging app that I don't actually really use. I've used it a few times. Sense
Yeah,
Chat on the EOS platform.
if I gambled, I would gamble it with crypto on crypto-based platforms without a problem. Gaming, I don't really get much time to game. I would like to be more exposed to it. But yeah, I think gaming is probably slow and rudimentary right now from what I've seen on some demos. But
Hmm.
again, that's the step development, not a linear development. As you move forward with the underlying infrastructure, you're going to see gaming go up. And over time, maybe 10 years, it'll close the gap between, sort of, we'll call it regular gaming and blockchain-based gaming. But without a doubt, that seems to me to be the future of that industry. The whole skins, you know, the in-game purchasing, it's very much made for what blockchain can and can't do, right?
Yeah, it was super interesting to learn from Brock Pierce. If anyone hasn't checked out that interview yet from our first version of the conference series, head over to our YouTube and check it out. But he was talking about how he was working in like World of Warcraft gaming, gold mining and selling objects, and how natural it was for him to bring his community into blockchain and to get into that community himself, because people and probably like younger people or people who spend a lot of time in these gaming environments already inherently understand like token economies, or having value represented in some different kind of object.
And digital, like there's nothing behind it. Yeah, but I want it.
Yeah.
That like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty simple. And I think, I think that like to me, it starts to like one, you have the chance for transparency. You have a chance for a layer of privacy that doesn't exist. And then you start to get, once you get those things done and the speed at play, then now you start to really, uh, you know, and look at the fight going on with Apple and Fortnite. This is an example of what's coming, right? And
Hmm.
we've seen at Gunclear firsthand how awful Apple is, and dealing with dealing with us. And so if you're building a native app and you're going to rely on the Apple Store and it has any aspect of crypto, you need to do some soul searching and make sure you're going to be able to get through.
Yeah, I listen to a lot of podcasts. Do you listen to The Pitch or Startup?
Yeah, of course.
A couple different episodes where they talk about people running into issues with Apple and their API and not being able to launch payments on their app without 50K worth of development. And just, yeah, what a nightmare it can be.
And no accountability for them towards their decision making, right? Like, oh, you can't do what you want to do. Oh, how would we know that? Because there's 3 apps already that do that with a relational database. So for us, we don't understand, right? And then the answer is just no. And where do you go? I mean, we're not Fortnite, right? Like, we're not going to court against Apple. So yeah, you as a student or a new entrepreneur in the space, I mean, to think you're just going to roll out a native app in Apple, you need to think through that, and hopefully we'll figure out pathways to get past that censorship in the future. I mean, that's the potential, I think.
Yeah, I definitely want to dive more into like your journey with Gunclear, but for any students tuning in or anybody curious about blockchain at universities, just wanted to get a little bit more insight into what is the scene like in Connecticut? Is if students are thinking about, I want to get into blockchain, which school should I pick? What are the best programs, and what's the scene like in the greater Connecticut area?
So UConn's up in northeast Connecticut. It's a good 100 miles from here where I live. The scene is, there's a lot of really smart kids. That's the scene, and they don't know one way from another, where they want to go, and they're exploring that. I think one of the things that I'm always so jealous of in Denver and San Francisco and New York and Boston is that massive network effect of people outside in the real world that you can tap into. It's not the same, right? When you get to a state school in a rural environment. And so they're working together, they're looking at things. We've done different challenges, different, how to code in Solidity camps. But I think it doesn't matter so much today because you can connect. I mean, if you're going to any school right now, you're probably virtual anyway. And the blockchain community, to me, has always been about connecting across borders. How many friends do I have in Singapore, in Switzerland, Africa, Europe, Asia, all over Asia, South Korea, Japan, that I wouldn't have if I didn't find this network. And it's been the occasional maximalist aside, it's an incredibly inclusive community, right? I mean, it's generally speaking people legitimately wanting to help each other. And I've never found where that's been a problem. And you're at the forefront of technology, and I think students, that should find a supportive network where they are and where they want to be. And at UConn, it's the Werth Institute. I mean, we always say that we want students to be the best at what they want to be the best at, right? And it's our job to figure out how to help you do it.
That's awesome. Yeah, and just to plug MouseBelt University for anyone tuning in, we've kind of always approached our educational initiatives from a perspective of doing things virtually, multiple office hours a week, trying to capture different time zones, make ourselves available. I mean, one of our portfolio companies is in Spain. And started as a student from a business school looking to learn just about blockchain business use cases, and they just met with us frequently and impressed our investment analysts enough that we invested in them as founders, and their business model has changed since they've been in our accelerator, but yeah, just trying to have all of those virtual opportunities. And while, you know, there's a massive tragedy happening right now, like hate to it's hard to find upsides, but when all of this kind of started, I've been, you know, an educator and an advocate for online education and educational technology. Kind of was just like, maybe now people will be more willing to connect in this different way that just brings more access to people. Because for me, it's all about access, and how many people who it's been so hard to show up to a classroom now can get an education, you know, disabilities, all sorts of reasons that access is inhibited. But I really find a lot of hope in it. And I think that there's going to be opportunities, you know, I think industry leaders who maybe didn't have the time before now have a lot of time to come sit down with our students and do more workshops and meetings. So we're going to be doing you know, Zoom calls regularly. We've got our Blockchain Education Alliance, which just added some enterprise companies who are interested in, you know, running pilots and all the supply chain management stuff. That's really cool. Anheuser-Busch, one of the largest beverage distributors in the world, you know, get them on, get some free beer for the students, and build some blockchain pilots.
For the time that we're in and the place that we're in, it's the perfect avenue for education, and this type of education, right? Universities are slower. Think of them as your, you know, think of them as your aircraft carriers, and think of these sort of things, accelerators tied to programs tied to, you know, you're going to see that, right, from the technological aspect, because it makes sense and because you can move faster. So you can tie a particular technology with a particular investor, with a particular set of experts, and then find the audience in a 7 billion person pool, as opposed to putting in the overhead that it costs to run a university. And we're much better at teaching the philosophies, the whys, the sciences, the maths, and we're much better at that than teaching the forefront of technology skill development to students. And
Mm-hmm.
we need to get better or we're in big trouble, but we're never going to be the best, because that's not where we can be. And what I think of, so to get to your earlier, this is the longest way to get to your earlier question. I think we're in the position to train people to be lifelong learners, to be excited about learning, and to be able to go to a MouseBelt, to be productive, to get into a True Ventures fellowship program, go out to Silicon Valley and see what it's like to put your code into the wild, right? And come back. That's what we can do really, really well, and different people can fill in the other gaps. Lifelong learning is a repetitive cliche, but it's also, I've got 4 degrees. You know, I'm sure you've got a few, and I've done many different online courses, many different educational programs on top of that, because if you're not up on it, you know, it's just the world's changing too fast. You know, you go back to the big data at the start of the interview, and it's like, I used to sit in meetings and just go, yeah, big data is the next big thing whenever people would say it. And like, I didn't know what they were even talking about. Why is data big? Like, you know, and when you start to learn and dig in, you're like, you know, I was like, wow, it really is a big deal. Like, this is what's going to drive business. And most of my colleagues in business strategy still think it's not that important. And I'm like, data drives it drives strategy, and companies make decisions based upon what data they're getting, how they're getting it, and instead of where they're making money now. And you know, so the world is different, and schools and programs, you know, universities feed to skills and then to specifically around items where you're combining all of those resources really well, in my opinion.
Well, it's interesting to see what kind of people this industry attracts, because I feel like a lot of from everywhere from students to professors and administrators to innovation leads at these enterprise companies to, CEO of Bitcoin.com, Roger Ver, is these people who are self-identified lifelong learners. And what we're just trying to do with this conference has always been very educational focused, and we put a lot of resources behind our university program at MouseBelt. So I think that we just want to communicate like how important education is, and if people really care about blockchain or mass adoption or real world use cases, then they need to be investing in education.
You need to. I mean, you can't understand what's happening in the world anymore unless you spend time. It just moves too fast, I think, at the end of the day for someone that's not continually thinking and pressing. And no matter how good you are today, tomorrow doesn't care.
Well, I really look forward to hopefully meeting some of the students over at the Werth Institute and seeing any way that, MouseBelt can be of help as far as entrepreneurship and technological education as it specifically pertains to blockchain. But now, I want people to know about the projects that you think are worth working on. It seems like you think a lot about where the problems are that actually need solutions. And I did have a question as to whether you had the idea for solutions for firearm owners before you decided to implement blockchain, or was it, I want to create a blockchain, where does the blockchain solution make the most sense? So yeah, tell us about Gunclear.
So little bit of both, I think. The reality of what happened first, a co-founder of mine said, "What about guns?" At some point when we were thinking about what we could do, and I said, "That's a really stupid idea." And here's why that's a really stupid idea. There's reasons why it's good, but it's dumb. And then you dive into the gun industry, and now I know more about firearms. I love to shoot firearms. I've owned them in the past. I've had a concealed carry permit in the past. Not here in Connecticut. It's almost too much of a heavy lift in this state.
To get concealed carry,
or just to get firearm purchases. I mean, it's a really bad process.
Really?
Yeah, and so we've looked around at the industry repeatedly. We've looked at it and said, can we implement some of the same privacy technology that Zcash is using to start to get to a world of zero knowledge marketing, zero knowledge data control, and why? And I remember thinking, why do they have this memo here in Zcash like this thing? And that was where we sort of came up with a lot of it was hanging out with the Zcash folks and asking questions and thinking about it. The use case itself, you have to think about adoption cycles. John Backus he's a guy out in California. I mean, he's just a good guy, smart guy, and he took us down the pathway of decentralized technology adoption in the use case one time in a salon on the sex industry, sex trade. And essentially looked at it and said, like, decentralized technology is absolutely the last place you go, right? Like, this is when you can't go anywhere else. BitTorrent doesn't happen, until everything that happened from Napster to BitTorrent happens, right? Like you go offshore first, and then eventually the U.S. government shows up. And we started thinking, so there's certain elements that are necessary to decentralized tech adoption today. And one of those is oppression. You have to feel oppressed. Gun owners feel oppressed. I mean, you can see how the industry uses it to drive sales, right? So it's very clear, right or wrong. I've never felt oppressed as a gun owner. I've never felt like someone's going to show up and take my guns, but others do. And so you start to think, well, They don't use relational databases in the firearms industry. It's actually illegal for a government unit to create a digital list of gun owners.
Right.
It's part of why they fight against background checks, universal background checks, because those systems are COBOL. They're written in COBOL. I mean, like, you want to see bad IT, go down any government pathway, and that was more the driving force was the government is not going to be able to build their own IT moving into the next generation. They don't have the talent and they don't have the skill to keep up with Web 2.0, let alone 3.0. Like,
Oh
and
my
so
gosh, just watch any Senate hearing on anything technology.
it's
That's
infuriating, right? And you're like, it makes sense when you think about all the things that they have to deal with, but at the same time, yeah, and they're not going to be able to afford the $250,000 a year applied scientist because there's no government position. The president makes 400,000, right? Like, so they build with the lowest common denominator tech stack, and that's never going to work in the gun industry. You have people that feel oppressed, and you have a large industry as well from a dollars and cents point of view that need digital solutions. And right now, the backbone of that is terrible. And so they can't protect their customers' privacy, and they don't. And so very few people use too much digital technology in the industry, and so therefore it's actually probably a prime place for us um, to build in. And now we'll actually put in the next 30, 40 days, we'll start putting that to the actual test, right? Like, as we're integrating these libraries on the ZK proofs. So it's really an exciting place. And I know it was hard to fundraise for this. Like, where's your token? What do you mean token? Like, we don't, like, what is what would the Gunclear token do? Like,
yeah.
well, when are you going to be ready? When when the research engineers make the theoretically possible actually possible? That's not a good answer, right? I have to deal with investors on a regular basis who are angry about that, right? Like, you should be in the market by now, and we're not. And so those are the things that the entrepreneur has to deal with every single day, that never shows up post hoc, right? Like all the worry and all the anxiety of whether this is going to work never gets there. So we just wanted to be in an industry where if we were able to execute, one, we could build a massive business, because otherwise it wasn't worth our time. Two, we wanted to be in an industry where we could have an impact. We believe with our technology, universal background checks not only become possible, but if you want to sell a gun to me, Ashlie, because there's a vibrant secondary market, how do you check my background, right?
Mm-hmm.
Depending upon what state you can't live in, you cannot, right? Or you have to go and pay someone at a gun shop to do it, and you're going out of your
To
way.
like
And
broker your gun sale.
yeah, and so, I mean, why in today's world can't you have a comprehensive digital solution which allows you to do that? And ultimately, blockchain, the integration of privacy technology with blockchain allows you to do that. And then you need to trust that it's going to be there in 10 years. And by utilizing blockchain and decentralizing, it can exist longer than, the blockchain components can exist longer than Gunclear itself. And there's great reasons to build in this industry with this technology. And so we're always looking for partners. And of course, you need money, but we're always looking for partners that are trying to work on this. And I think UX UI is the next frontier of this stuff. I mean, to to my to my opinion, I'd love someone who is way out in front of UX UI and blockchain, thinking how do we accomplish this? How do you have multiple? You have a store, you have a range, you have gun owners, you have legal authorities, you have Gunclear. We don't even see what people are doing, right? So. Um,
Yeah, maybe it might be helpful for we have international listeners and people tuning in from all over the world. Luckily you're talking to someone whose,
from
dad is a
America.
gun nut. living in Colorado where my friends, are all building their own guns and really interested in hunting or going out shooting. And so I do understand a little bit more about it than some people might. But maybe you can just walk us through how, just tell us, as you as a gun owner trying to buy or sell a gun, how they would use your product. What is Gunclear actually trying to do? What are the problems that people might not even know about that this solution was needed for?
Yeah, so I mean, if we got hours in constitutional law, first thing anyone international says to us is like, why don't you just use a database? First thing, and we said, well, we can't. That we wouldn't be able to involve the government in this process, and we eventually see the government paying for this process or receiving, depends how that it sets up for them. But I mean, we do see the government as a partner here at some point somehow, but it's privacy that they don't need to know Ashlie and David transacted a gun. They need to know two cleared people transacted a gun. So in America, since the birth of America, that's been one of the core fundamental rights, is gun ownership, and there's 425 million guns in America, and so it's a lot. And other countries don't get it. I understand that. I grew up in Europe for a couple of years. There is an inherent belief in defending yourself and defending yourself from tyranny and defending yourself from the government. And one of the core beliefs of most gun owners is that if there are 400 million guns out there, it becomes hard to subjugate people. So there's that thing going on. Then there's, in 1986, they passed a law which forbid the creation of these digital databases, not really understanding what that would mean in 2020, right? And so never thinking about, well, privacy technology or this or that. And so, the idea of a zero knowledge proof really wasn't even plausible. So they created that law to protect gun owners from having their guns confiscated. Right or wrong, that's what the law is, and it's not going to change. There's no group that's able to muster the votes required to change that law.
Yeah, I think people who own firearms are pretty interested in privacy. A lot of them.
A lot of times there's a nice correlation. Look, in one of the key fundamentals that we talk about three things: compliance, privacy, and safety. There's a lot of gun owners that want to be compliant with every law there is, do not want to transfer their guns into a bad situation, an illegal situation. Most crimes are committed with stolen firearms. That rarely do they buy compliant firearms, right? And so that's the great majority of them. So compliance, privacy, we believe you should be digitally private. Like if you're not, you end up in a situation in a surveillance state, and then without privacy is necessary to freedom. It's a necessary precondition in our opinion. And then safety. Why would you not want to be safe with your firearms? Like, why would you not want to do a background check on someone? Okay, like what if okay, you don't want to create a database, you don't want to be monitored, but why can't you do it without doing that? And today that's possible, where it wasn't in 1985, right? And so there's a long list of reasons why you go this route with firearms, most of them uniquely American, but not I'd be lying if there wasn't international ambitions, right?
Absolutely. So what exactly is it that the product does? This would be something, it said that a private and digital way to manage your inventory. Just knowing what you own or who you sold it to, or
most paperwork in the firearms industry is actually that paperwork. The use cases, the customer journeys where, hey, do you have that paperwork? No, right? Well, maybe somewhere, right? Oh, that got stolen, right? you bought a gun and you don't have if you don't, one of my favorite use cases was a student who actually, if he didn't have the paperwork when the police showed up, it was a real problem because the gun had been used
Mm-hmm.
in a serious crime. And so, you're traveling, you want to be able to travel, you need to save your permit. Like, why can't you do this digitally? Why can't you do it privately? Transferring that inventory. So gun dealers have what's called an A&D book, acquisitions and dispositions. Once that first disposition is made, the provenance of that gun is gone, just like art, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we would like to see a world that says, if you can't prove your provenance of the gun, then that gun is worth significantly less. Push it. It doesn't belong in the legitimate marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
And because you don't know what you bought, and most people do not want to buy a gun that was stolen in Texas, used in crimes in Chicago, sold to a pawn shop in Columbus, Ohio, bought in Ohio and taken to Florida, and then sold to their buddy. I mean, most people just don't want that.
Yeah.
Um, and ballistics testing is getting more advanced. And guess what they can create? A relational database of ballistics reports. And at some point, someone's gonna get arrested for owning a gun that was used in a murder that they have no connection. And like, how'd you buy it? Well, I bought it from a guy for $100, right? Like, those transactions don't need to be happening. That's our belief. Like, buy your gun from a legal dealer. If it's a secondary transaction, just create a private record that exists and continues the chain of ownership. And that's what we do. Do we want to provide uh, value and service along the entire value chain and the life of the user? Yes, without a doubt. Do we want to provide the cool little things that you can do digitally that you're not going to do in a notepad, right? Yeah. Do we want, if you're a gun collector, do we want you to be able to look through your entire inventory and play with that? Yeah, for sure. But generally speaking, we want to make sure people are compliant, their privacy is protected, and the world is safer. And so, the more we can create value in the space, the more people will use it, and then you change a human behavior. Once you change a human behavior, the whole world's possible.
I love that. Super fascinating. Any things coming up or announcements or updates about Gunclear, and where can people learn more?
Yeah, Gunclear.io is the website. We should be launching a new one in about a month. We had to tear it up a little bit to try to get through the Apple store, but that was ultimately unsuccessful. And so we're going to go with a web app, and then move an inventory management system onto, without transacting firearms, onto the native apps. So, but for transactions, it'll be there. We'll start building out a more digital community with resources for compliance in the next 60 days. That's on our list. Moving towards finding instructors and building community within the instructor community, beyond certifications. Like, we want you to know that, hey, this instructor is compliant as well, and is digitally competent. And
Oh,
uh,
another real world use case for blockchain, right? I just know some of my friends going through getting their permits, their concealed permits in Colorado, and with shelter in place, and some people were doing Zoom classes and half in person, and then the sheriff in the other town doesn't accept them from that instructor, and do they have the right certificate number? It's just like, oh, can we just have all of our blockchains on, or all of our certificates on the blockchain?
yeah, yeah. I mean, that becomes really easy, I think. Um, I think in the next 5 years we're going to see that. I mean, we're going to see that movement towards those use cases when the UX UI starts to get to where people, it's worth moving, uh, and you start to ask, well, why do I have to, I think about Zoom and I'm like, oh, this is so easy, right? Like they made it so easy to video conference and it
Mm-hmm.
works. And it works. And generally speaking, the quality of the video and audio is super high, regardless of the internet, and whereas I get on Google Meet, I get on different programs and like it's a crapshoot. What is this? WebEx, whatever. That's like a total 50-50 whether it's going to work today or not. And sometimes on Zoom you have to shut down the video, but generally that doesn't happen. And so when we start to make our products that accessible and hit it out of the park, like like Zoom did, those blockchain companies are going to fly. And then as you get 1, 2, 3, I didn't want to put a credit card into my phone one time, right? I'm old enough.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want.
Mm-hmm.
I want to buy something on an app. Yeah, that was it's not long ago, 10 years ago. That was crazy.
Yeah.
That so I mean it changes pretty fast. In 2014, Facebook was never going to be mobile. It was the biggest bust IPO ever, right? I mean they were.
Mm-hmm.
I mean people are wrong all the time, and that's the beauty of being an entrepreneur is something they don't.
Well, on that note, it's been super awesome talking to you. Love all the work that you're doing at the Werth Institute, and I think that Gunclear is a super interesting project, and is just a really good example of someone really going out into the world and seeing what the problem is, and finding a blockchain solution for it. Any last words to any students who might be tuning in? If they're thinking about going into an entrepreneurial path or diving into blockchain.
Yeah, don't do either one of those, right? Like that's the best advice. Get a nice job.
It's like if you like
Listen,
sanity.
yeah, listen to your mother. Like, or if you don't listen to your mother, then join us. I think that's the piece. I always end with students. I always end the class with, I was in law school and I had an opportunity to go join a Silicon Valley firm when I was in law school in 1999, and I thought that was a silly idea, right? Like, I finally came down to the conclusion, oh, I'm in law school, I need to finish, I need to do this, it worked out not in my favor. I'm doing very well, but that was the adventure that should have been taken, right? And maybe I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
ready for it. Maybe there's a reason why it didn't happen, but you there, if you want to change the world, at some point you have to change the world, and no amount of thinking about things is going to do that. It's like the last piece. Thank you.
Oh, yes. I have to tell you this book that I've been reading. So I'll do a book recommendation this time for anyone watching. It's The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And it's basically a no nonsense, very short chapters. Just do the thing. You just have, you got to do it. Writers write. Sit down and
So,
write.
so a great book and a great author, Thomas Wettlesborg. Also one of the coolest names ever. What's Your Problem? Harvard Business published it. And essentially, the tenet is people spend too much time solving the wrong problem. And figure out the actual problem. And if you combine those two books, I think you have something really like there's an education, and then just follow it.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot. We'll have to put all of that in the show notes. Thank you everyone for tuning in. And this is David Noble over at UConn and co-founder of Gunclear. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
And we'll be back with more from Reimagine 2020 virtual conference.